Israel's Prime Minister, he made it clear today when he said, "We are not done with the war in Gaza. In fact, we are witnessing what looks to be a new chapter in the conflict between Israel and Hamas." The Israeli Security Cabinet has approved a plan to escalate the military campaign in the Gaza Strip. Well, what does this mean for the remaining Israeli hostages? And what does this plan mean for the people who call Gaza home? They'll have to move, a forced relocation that Netanyahu says is for their own protection. We begin the day with the next chapter in the war between Israel and Hamas. The hope of a ceasefire has been fading for months, but the announcement coming from Israel today leaves the idea of a halt to this war firmly in the category of wishful thinking. The Israeli Security Cabinet has approved a plan to call up tens of thousands of additional soldiers. Their apparent mission: go into Gaza, seize it, and stay put. Prime Minister Netanyahu calls it a new forceful entry into Gaza. It will also include another forced relocation of most of Gaza's population. Will this new offensive, will it force an earlier end to this conflict? Will it force Hamas to hand over the remaining Israeli hostages? Here's what the Israeli army had to say today.
The objective of the operation is to return our hostages, topple and subdue the Hamas regime. These two goals are intertwined. The operation will be a broad offensive that includes moving a majority of the population of the Gaza Strip. This is to protect them in a sterile area away from Hamas.
DW's correspondent in Jerusalem, Emily Gordine, has more on Israel's plans.
This plan comes hand in hand with the call-up of tens of thousands of reservists in Israel. This operation is meant to be expanded over time. It is meant to be expanded gradually, giving the military enough time to actually prepare and organize this expansion of the ground invasion, of the ground operations. It also includes the distribution of aid. Israel is very aware of the humanitarian situation on the ground, but there are still a lot of question marks over how that's going to happen. The operation in and of itself is meant to last several months and could ultimately culminate in the reoccupation of Gaza. We've heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu tonight. He said that this will in fact lead to, quote, occupation of territory and sustained Israeli presence in Gaza, and it will also include the transfer of Gaza's population. Now, of course, it's important to note here, though, that this operation, at least from what we're hearing in Israeli media, is not meant to begin not until after Trump's visit to the Middle East in mid-May. So that does leave room for potential deal to be struck over the next few weeks. But it also has to be said that negotiations have stalled since Israel resumed the war in mid-March, and Hamas, for its part, shows no sign of budging.
Well, that was Emily Gordine reporting in Jerusalem. I'm joined now by Hazem Balousha. He reported for DW from Gaza before the current war between Israel and Hamas forced him to leave the territory. He is now based in Ontario, Canada. It's good to have you back with us this evening. How do Palestinians in Gaza, what are you hearing? How do they view this new expanded military operation that was announced by Israel today?
That is freaked people out. Since early morning, when I talk to people there, and if you look at the social media, all the statements came out from Gaza. It's scary. People are, they were expecting that the war to be ended soon, and they expecting the pressure that on the both sides would lead to a renew of a ceasefire or reaching a settlement to end the war completely. And in the contrary, what happens that now Israel is announcing the expanding of the war. That's very hard and very tough for the people in Gaza.
There are those who would say that Israel's plan to expand its offensive could increase pressure on Hamas to reach a deal with Israel. What do you say to that?
Well, apparently that is not easy to predict, but Hamas was very clear on that. The military pressure wouldn't lead to end or Hamas giving up or surrender. During the year and a half of the war, didn't make Hamas or, to give up and to surrender. And more expansion and more Israeli incursion in some areas wouldn't lead to that at this point. Maybe some changes, some slight concessions here and there, which Hamas made. I mean, their demands in the beginning was changed as they reached, and now they made so many concessions, but completely giving up and accepting the Israeli conditions, likely Hamas is not accepting at this level.
Israel's army says that most of Gaza's population will have to move again to bring them to an area away from Hamas. That's what we're hearing. Is it possible to separate the civilian population from Hamas in Gaza?
Well, this is a tricky thing. I mean, that it happened before. I mean, Israel asked people to leave for area in the southern part of Gaza Strip. But I mean, in the same time, that they continued the airstrikes and bombardment of these areas and killed so many people in these areas. So people, I don't think that they would believe on going into there. Plus, they are talking about moving people behind the Muraj corridor, the new corridor between Khan Yunis and Rafah, which is which means that the people will go to Rafah. The whole population, 2 million Palestinians, will go to Rafah. Plus, Rafah is completely or almost completely destroyed, so there is no places. Plus, people were very desperate to go back to the north, and we had seen that during the time of the ceasefire, when the people fled and rushed to go back to the north.
Just the logistics of that, Hazem. I mean, moving that many people, excuse me, in an area that has already been decimated by war. I mean, is it even possible, or is this a non-starter?
Well, this is not. I mean, we don't know. I mean, if Israel said the only source of aid would be in this area, people would be forced to go there. But I mean, voluntarily, I don't think people will go there, even if there was airstrikes. If the situation was similar to the time before the ceasefire, when the people were in the south, people had suffered a lot during the time from the overcrowding, from lack of food, access to the areas, separation in the families. So that wasn't an ideal for the people. So from that experience, I feel that the people wouldn't accept that unless that was the only source of food or stability.
I'm wondering, how strong of a hold does Hamas still have in Gaza? I mean, in recent months, we've seen public protests in Gaza against Hamas. I mean, does that show that dissatisfaction is growing?
Definitely. No doubt that Hamas is facing a huge criticism. The dissatisfaction of Hamas and criticism of Hamas is increasing and widely announced and publicly said by the people in videos on social media, even on mainstream media. People are criticizing Hamas, and that's not a secret. Hamas popularity is in the least point that ever Hamas had in its history. That because many people disagreed with Hamas, with the attacks on October 7 and the behavior of Hamas during the war as well.
What about the time after Hamas? Is there any kind of credible plan to replace Hamas as the governing body in Gaza?
That's the question. That's the $1 million question. That nobody is ready to take over Gaza. There is no anybody that said that I wanna take over Gaza. Even the Palestinian Authority, I mean, Israel and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that he wouldn't accept that Palestinian Authority to be back and to govern and rule Gaza. So one of the things that kept Hamas in power in Gaza, now there is no alternative. And Hamas controlled Gaza for like 17 years, and the only bodies and institutions that are available in Gaza is like belonging and to Hamas and supported and funded by Hamas as well.
Okay, well, aside from having a monopoly, I guess, on power in Gaza, what do we know? What does Hamas do, though, to suppress, crack down on dissent? What are they doing to make sure that there aren't any alternatives to them?
They have many ways, actually, but I mean, during the ceasefire time is different than that there is like airstrikes. Hamas movement currently, the people of, the Hamas fighters or officers or whoever they are from the security, they have very a very tight restriction on their movement currently. So they fear the Israeli targeted against them. So which happened many times during the time, even after the resume of the war. So their way is different from the calm time and the wartime. But currently, Hamas is using the media to criminalize whoever is out and saying anything against Hamas, showing that when they say anything against Hamas means that they are cooperating and collaborating with Israel and the enemies of Palestinians and against the Palestinian cause. Second thing that they have means, the old means, calling people, threatening people. In some areas, some incidents were recorded that Hamas beated some people, those who organized the protests against Hamas.
Journalist Hazem Balousha. Hazem, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm joined now by Etgar Keret. He is one of Israel's leading contemporary authors. He's also a vocal critic of Benjamin Netanyahu's government. He joins us tonight from Tel Aviv. Etgar, it's good to have you back on the program. I want to ask you first, what do you think is behind this latest plan?
To be honest, I don't completely understand. Like, I can understand how it serves Netanyahu politically, because Netanyahu has right-wing partners like Ben Gvir and Smotrich that basically in their dreams they would want to see Israel occupy Gaza. You know, they're still lamenting settlements that were in the Gaza Strip that were taken off. So I think that I can understand how this keeps his government. I can understand that how it will help him in his trial, coming to this trial as a prime minister. I can see parallelly as this war advances, with no real goals. Mm-hmm. Basically, the places that are going to be conquered in Gaza were already held in our hands. Places like Sejaiya, we got into those neighborhoods for the first and second and third time, losing people, with Gaza losing civilians, with no real strategy. And since the first day of the war, people talked about the day after. Yeah. And even now, when we talk about having a greater war, Netanyahu refuses to talk about the day after. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to occupy it for how long?
Let me ask you, Edgar, too, about how this plan is being communicated. I mean, you're an author, you're a writer, you know the power of words. An official today talked of the conquest of the Palestinian territory, and we've heard from the far-right finance minister calling on Israelis to embrace the word occupation. What do you make of these words that the Israeli government is using and pushing?
Yeah, so what I think is that Netanyahu's government, they have less and less support with every following day. So the idea is that, when you think about it, that you have 70% or more than 70% support of the public that want to end the war and to get the hostages back. And basically, he's representing a minority. So what they're doing all the time, they're going against the will of the people, against the will of the country, and the way that they want to do it is by going to the extreme. When people want the 7th of October massacre to be investigated, they say we can't investigate it. We're in the middle of a war. Mm-hmm. Now, Israel is always famous in the fact we're a small country. We can't stand long wars. Our army is a reserve duty army. It's people with kids and babies and take care of the store. We are famous for a 6-day war. Yeah. And now we're already a year and a half into war with no goals, basically sinking deeper and deeper, and hurting civilians in Gaza, soldiers getting hurt for nothing but to keep a government that doesn't have the support of the people to keep on going.
The families of the hostages, they are very critical of this plan. They've said that it would mean sacrificing hostages held in the Palestinian territory. Do you think priorities have shifted now? Is the return of the hostages no longer the top priority of this government?
Well, it was never the top priority of the government because from the first week of the war, there was a way of ending the war and releasing them. And, and I'm saying it's a question, when would you want to take this deal? But it looks like as if they never wanted to take that deal. And I think that what's happening now is that they basically are speaking out what they've been acting out, for the entire period of the war. Mm-hmm. People, some I've heard about, some I knew personally, people found their deaths in Gaza just because this government didn't want to sign an agreement that brings a release. Now, Israel has many enemies, not only the Hamas, and the idea that suddenly Gaza is the crucial existential issue of Israel. When we have problems in Syria and in Lebanon and with Turkey taking power and with Iran and with the Yemenites shooting at our airport, the whole idea is that this entire country should put everything it has on a battered city and on the smallest and most beaten enemy that Israel has in the world. This has to be political because it doesn't seem rational.
What do you think about what we heard from the Prime Minister today regarding the Palestinians living in Gaza? He said that almost all of them would have to be relocated for their own protection. I mean, do you trust the military to actually, relocate these people? We don't know where they would be relocated to, but do you trust that would happen in a responsible manner?
No, and I think, again, from day one, the idea was that if we don't want Hamas, we need to have other Palestinian partnership. It's like the Palestinian Authority or other Palestinians. Now, as long as we don't have that, we can only live day by day because you can't beat Hamas by killing all the terrorists of the Hamas. When Second World War ended, it ended in an agreement. It didn't end with every Nazi supporter hanging from a tree. You don't end conflict this way. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that it seems as if this government doesn't have any plan or any solution. If you ask Netanyahu, he can say he can move the people from Gaza here and he can move them there. And in the process, civilians are dying and children are dying and soldiers are dying and reserve soldiers are serving for hundreds and hundreds of days and losing their jobs and losing their family. And the idea is for what? What is the plan? You can say total victory, but what would that mean? Sinwar is dead. The Hamas had disbanded. The idea still exists. But, it's really like it's just speaking in empty words.
Mm-hmm. Author Etgar Keret joining us tonight from Tel Aviv. Etgar, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And for more on this, I'm joined now by Mairav Zonszein, the senior Israel analyst for the International Crisis Group in Tel Aviv. Welcome to DW. Great to have you back on the programme again. We're hearing very, very strong words from Israel today, an expansion of the war, conquest, seizure of the entire Palestinian territory. Can I ask you for your reaction, first of all, to those words?
Hi, Anya. Thanks. Good to be with you. The decision is basically one that's going to be incremental, and it's kind of an ultimatum that Israel has given to Hamas, saying, if you don't reach the deal that we want, which is essentially a release of hostages without an end to the war, we will go in and we will seize more territory. But in many ways, this is, despite the suffering of the Gaza population and their starvation, this is more of the same, and it's unclear to me how this is going to defeat Hamas or separate Hamas from the civilian population or achieve the release of hostages, which, as much of the Israeli public already understands, the military operations have not released hostages, mostly except for the deals. The deals are what have released the hostages. So at this point, this is more of a threat than a reality on the ground in Gaza, despite the destruction of the Strip. And I'm not sure where this is going to lead.
Well, Israel's aim in all of this has always been very clear: to defeat Hamas and to secure the release of the hostages still in Gaza. So, I mean, you just said that it's not clear to you how this could make those things happen, but does the Israeli government see these quite extreme measures as the only way to achieve its goals then?
Well, you have different elements in the Israeli leadership today. You have Netanyahu, who is essentially biding his time and trying to remain in power and juggling different moving parts. You have a far right that he has to rely on to stay in power that is very open about wanting to cleanse Gaza of Palestinians and rebuild Israeli settlements there. And so we are on that trajectory currently because there's nothing else really happening. It's just very, very incremental. And then you have a military and defense establishment, much of which former top officials have said that the war should end and the hostages should come out. But the current military IDF chief of staff has warned that Israel cannot starve Gazans and be a part of violating international law, which it is already doing and could do to a bigger extent, and that the military operations are not going to release the hostages. In fact, it could actually endanger them. So you have very conflicting approaches within Israeli leadership itself, and you have obviously the domestic political issues about Netanyahu wanting to remain in power. So again, it's unclear, where this is going to go. But for now, Netanyahu is basically letting the far right call the shots.
What about public opinion in Israel? I mean, how is the Israeli public reacting to this?
So throughout the war, there's been a consensus, as you said, that Hamas must be defeated. But for months now, there have been polls that a majority of Israelis are willing to end the war, even if it means keeping Hamas in power, to release the hostages. And that has grown and grown. And we've seen unprecedented, calls from former heads of the top of security elite in Israel, people who have devoted their lives to Israeli security, people who are hawkish, people who don't want peace with the Palestinians necessarily. And they're all saying the same thing, that the war goals cannot be achieved the way that they have been set out, and that Netanyahu is only doing this to keep himself in power. And so you have, for the first time since the war began, really, since Israel broke the ceasefire in March, for the first time you have an Israeli government leading a war without public consensus. And that's pretty much a first in Israel.
Mm-hmm. There is also strong pushback around the world to Israel's plans. We've got an EU spokesperson calling on Israel to show restraint, widespread criticism from human rights groups, from the UN. Do you think there is anything or anyone who could convince Netanyahu to not to escalate further?
I mean, I think the only game in town, unfortunately, is Trump. We saw that Trump came into the presidency and got the ceasefire in January. And his strategy is all over the place, and he's not coherent. And Witkoff has been here and seemed very devoted to releasing the hostages, but now is busy in Iran and Russia. So we don't know how committed Trump is, but he is coming to the region in 2 weeks, and he does have the ability to force a ceasefire on Netanyahu. It's very clear that Netanyahu understands that he cannot say no to Trump. And so if Trump forced it on him, and even most Israelis, families of the hostages, they understand that. They're not counting on their own government to get the hostages back. They're counting on Trump to do it. So Trump, in addition, in cooperation with the Arab countries and the Gulf countries who are interested and willing to take a role, especially funding in the reconstruction of Gaza, and Egypt, who has to, has a plan, but has to kind of revamp it to include aspects of security. These are things that are possible and doable, and there is a small opposition in Israel who is in favor of going this route. But unfortunately, Trump hasn't put his foot down just yet.
Mairav Zonszein from the International Crisis Group. Mairav, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Natasha Hall is a senior fellow with the Middle East program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. What do you make of Israel's plan, expanding the war at a time so many were hoping it'd be wound up?
Yeah, I mean, we have been hearing that Israel would like to expand the war and potentially reoccupy not just part of the Gaza Strip, but the entirety of it. And really what we've heard in recent days is that if there isn't a ceasefire at the close of President Trump's 3-day visit to the Gulf, then they will, quote, flatten all of Gaza, which essentially means disenabling anyone to return. And that's exactly what we've been seeing over the past few months, in fact, in a blockade that has not allowed a single bottle of water or any food into the Strip for 2 months. This is the longest it's been since the start of this bloody war.
How is Netanyahu hoping to sell this to a domestic audience? Because there is a huge amount of the population against this war going on, and they want the top priority to be bringing home those hostages.
Yeah, in fact, 60 to 70% of Israelis want this war to come to an end and all of the hostages home. And really what Netanyahu is talking about is a piecemeal effort in which only 5 to 10 hostages come. And even Hamas has talked about a whole deal where all of the hostages come home in return for Israeli troop withdrawals and a true end, a permanent end to this war. But Netanyahu and his very conservative cabinet appear to just be pressing ahead and without any kinds of red lights from the Trump administration.
Well, an Israeli official says there's a window of opportunity for a hostage deal during Donald Trump's visit to the region next week. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Well, I think there was many windows of opportunity. In fact, there was a deal that was in place when Trump came into office for the return of the hostages. But Israel pressed forward with the war. So it still remains to be seen what they're exactly speaking about when it comes to the return of the hostages and what they would want in return, because they're still talking about a temporary ceasefire. And once again, we still haven't seen any aid or any resources get into the Gaza Strip. And I suspect that this trip will not have Gaza as its priority. So I am not optimistic about that.
Well, how much influence do you think the US president really has over Netanyahu and this war?
Well, Israel gets billions of dollars in military equipment and personnel and intelligence assistance from the United States. So the United States has an incredible amount of leverage, but we haven't really seen the U.S. use its leverage, not just during the Trump administration, but during the Biden administration as well. Essentially, Israel has gotten either a direct green light or an indirect green light by not having anyone from the U.S. side essentially tell Israel to stop. And so it really seems like we may see a continuation, even an expansion of this war, which is really hard to believe if you have seen pictures of Gaza anytime recently.
Natasha Hall, thank you very much for your insights.